but do they really give you what it is you're actually after? You might have you'll have all these great skill sets, but you've not actually achieved what it is you want to actually do.
Yeah, it's almost like feeling like you're kind of doing something towards it.
Yeah, your CV.
Peddling it.
Yeah, your CV is great. Oh, I can do After Effects and Final Cut Pro and Adobe Creative Suite and and you look at it and think, oh, brilliant, I know all that stuff. But can you actually use it? Can you implement it?
Yeah.
If we give you a brief, can you actually take that idea and use that software to do that? And so, yeah, learning anything, it comes from that passion thing. You need to, anything from a learning point of view, you need to have at least an interest in it. Or else, A, what's the point? But B, you're not going to learn or get the most from it. And it's not, unless you get super lucky, this is not an industry you do for money. It just isn't. Unless you work for a very big agency where you just become a sheep, basically, and they make a lot of money. It's not, you do it because you love doing it. And you might get, if you're a one-man band, you might get some good clients and some good projects and brilliant, but they're few and far between. Softwares, you have to go on social media. The moment you start Googling and looking, there is so much stuff online for various creative software, whether it be Adobe or whoever, and finding the right one can be a minefield, and they're expensive. So you're like, well, you've got to commit. You sign up to subscription, and then you realize actually it's not for you. That's another important factor in this, is look at it from a financial point of view, particularly if you're starting up for yourself. That's at the outset. I've just purely through the path that my career has taken, I've ended up being a bit of a jack of all trades and a master of none. And that has both its benefits and its pitfalls at the same time. It means I can answer most briefs and deliver to a client. But ultimately, I still, even now, see guys considerably younger than me doing work that I'm envious of because they've focused. They've just gone, that's what I want to do. I just want to do brand, or I just want to do animation. All their time goes back to that 10,000 hours thing. They've spent their entire time focusing on that one thing. If I was to give one piece of advice from a career point of view, is I would say definitely focus on your strengths. Work out what it is you love to do, what you're good at doing, and make that your thing. Because not only will you get the best out of it because you love doing it, but also I think what will then happen is I think customers and clients will see that. It might take a while to get there, but they're more likely to get more engaged because they can see it in your work. So much commercial design is just so flat. It's just because it just gets farmed out. It's churned out. It's like, the whole Fiverr logo thing. It's like, really? What's the point? There's no, you as a customer have clearly not shown passion in your business because you've just thought, well, I'll just spend £10 getting my logo done. And the poor designer at the other end is just gone, I'm just trying out dodgy logos because I'm not getting... Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's a trade-off, it's always going to be a trade-off, but whoever you are, what it is you do, you got to love doing it. Or what's the point? What's the point? Seriously. Well, I often think, well, maybe I should just become a lawyer or something like that. But I couldn't. Like I say, I come home and I crack open Photoshop. Maybe I'm just sad. Maybe I need to get out more. Maybe there's me saying get out more, but... But I try to mix it up. I like going to cinema. Cinema's my thing, and going to galleries and exhibitions. I say Daisy and I know each other for a little while. A couple of months back, went up to see the street art exhibition up at the Southampton Gallery, which is a great piece. Historically it was great, but also in terms of where it's all going in the future. You have to sometimes look back to go forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good example actually of like your historical references and things like that, and that factoring into how you perceive things. Because definitely at that exhibition, for me, I think I was probably looking at it a very different way than you were, because I wasn't around for a lot of it and I didn't get a lot of the kind of references to pieces of music and things. But I think with my own kind of experience, like going from an art degree and then dropping out and going to interior architecture, which seems completely different, but definitely has its crossover. I think I was kind of absorbing it from like understanding graffiti and street art as like a spatial thing.
Sure.
So it's like, again, the communication and creative communication and kind of understanding how it's a funny one because like people see it as a bit like wrong and it only happens in rough areas and stuff like that. But even the other day I was walking through the common and you know where the little like underpass is and there's the graffiti along that. Everyone was painting over it like really carefully with their little rollers and then they were going and doing their tags and...
Well, street art has been around for a lot longer than we think. It was around way before spray cans.
Yeah.
I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's about expression. Some of it's political, some of it's territorial. You know, tagging and things like that was always been about this is our street. But then you get some guys that are just like, obviously Banksy, it's big, you know, obviously big one at the moment. But you know, not that long ago, back in the 80s, you had people like Keith Haring and people like that were, you know, part of that whole kind of New York hip hop scene that were street artists who ended up, even in their own lifetime, having big shows and exhibitions and galleries paying them tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to show their work. The fact is, a lot of them just loved, I mean, Keith Haring famously gave away. He used to do postcards and posters on the street and stuff. He just loved doing it.
Yeah, it wasn't money motivated, was it? It started.
No, but you're always going to get that wrong group of people who just think, well, it's just graffiti. It's just destroying our architecture and our walls. And yeah, there's a lot of that, but it's still a form of expression, whether it's a piece of paper or a brick wall, or talking, writing, speaking. You know, Stephen Fry often says about literature and stuff. He always he hates pedants, people who are claim to be literary kind of masters because they've read lots of literature and know how to string a sentence in writing. And his thing is always, well, actually, if someone's writing down a written word and expressing themselves, then that's got to be a good thing, isn't it? Whether the spelling might not be great and the grammar might not be brilliant, but the fact that they're actually just doing it shows that they're expressing themselves in written form. My feeling's exactly the same with art, and this is why I say, you know, people who say there aren't artisan or aren't creative, I think it's nonsense. You know, drawing a circle, 2 dots, and a curve, most people recognise it's a face.
Yeah.
The communication piece done. You know, if you said what it needs to do, and it's a very simplistic form, and ultimately nothing is that new. You have to look at what happened this week with Ed Sheeran and the court case with the song that was supposedly lifted. But he said, well, at the end of the day, it's the same 4 chords. Half of the songs out there use exactly the same chord structure. And he even took a guitar in court and played a good 30, 40 songs that all used exactly the same chord system. He said, there was nothing there that was different. He says that as someone who grew up listening to all forms of music, they're naturally going to be part of his tools. And they are tools. You know, he even referenced lots of classical pieces of music, songs that are hundreds of years old. And he said they've been around for centuries before, and they're going to be around for centuries after. So to say that you own that 4 chord structure is nonsense. And most of art is, you know, going back, as mentioned earlier about the whole cave painting thing, that's where it kind of started. Somebody somewhere did that. There was a chicken and egg thing, you know. Somebody somewhere had to express themselves in some way, and then another local tribe went, well, that's actually a really good idea. I think I might do that to teach my group some stuff. And then it, you know, these things spread. So nothing's, you know, that's the other thing as well. Don't be afraid of thinking, yeah, of course there's plagiarism. You can't exactly copy something. You know, taking a logo, even with graphic design, you see stuff with the McVitie's and what was it, Marks and Spencer tried to do some Jaffa cakes or something a little while ago. I can't think who it was. Was it Lidl? And that happens all the time. Well, who comes up with the name Jaffa cake? And if the branding uses orange peel and in the same colours and things like that, is it copyright? And some of it you think is a bit close. So you're always going to get situations like that. But, you know, if you see something that you like the look of, don't be afraid to pay homage, as it were. how many Banksy knockoffs are there, for example? You see them all the time.
Well, he did it himself, didn't he? He went out and sort of covered himself up and looked like someone else. Not that anyone knows what he looks like anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you see something that you think is cool, I think what should by nature happen is that you just experience so much stuff and see so much stuff. You're not even realizing that you're referencing it or using it as a homage. It's just there. It just becomes part of your visual toolkit.
Yeah.
And it just goes back to exactly what I said at the outset, which is just, feeding yourself with this stuff and talking to people. Ideas come from the strangest places. Yes, you'll get a large amount of it online just because Google's flooded with loads of good stuff. But talking to people and touching things and not touching people, but things. But that's
it could be that as well.
It could be that. That's a certain creative areas can happen and work and get good money. But it's ultimately it is about just all of life is experiences without getting too deep. But from a design point of view, I think it's I'm just going to say feeding the mind. I keep saying, just repeating myself all the time. But yeah.
Have a sip of your wine. You're gonna go for it.
I was going to say I was trying to think, but I just keep reminding myself that I keep repeating myself, and I don't want to keep doing that for your podcast.
No, I think that's part of the process of figuring out your own kind of philosophy around creativity, though, isn't it? It's like life. I think in living itself, and this is going to get a bit spiritual.
No, I know where this is going.
I think through living, you're already inherently creative. You can't.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
You can't erase that out. It's just whether you accept it or not, and what your kind of view of the world is, because that's essentially where your ideas come from. Your creativity is almost like processing it. And I think I saw a quote. I can't remember if it was Rick Rubin. That it was something like your creativity is the process, not the product.
Yes.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah. A large part of it comes from confidence as well. And it's like you were saying, life experiences is a really good example. If you were just going to be the sort of person that just sits on the couch all day long watching Netflix.
Which I do sometimes.
Well, which we all do. Which we all do. But you were never going to... How much actual self-development are you going to get from that? How much are you really going to learn?
Yeah.
And it comes from confidence. You think, well, what if I make a mistake? What if this happens? And if I make if that goes wrong, whatever. And the thing is, it doesn't matter. You have to do these things. At some point as a child, you put your hand in a fire and realise it was going to burn your hand.
Yeah.
And most of life, as we all know, is exactly like that. There are going to be times where something happens and you get hurt, but then the idea is you learn from it, and that part of that learning process then feeds into who you are as a person and how you look at life and your work, and whether you're an artist or or any form of creativity, that feeds into it. I still like that thing whereby the blank page or the blank screen becomes my world. That's my domain. You're gonna have to look at the news, and so much of the world is out of our control. There's nothing we can do about certain aspects of our life. But where you can have control is in how you express yourself. And for me personally, having a page or blank screen, that's my escapism. That's that. I'm not a religious man, but in that moment, I am God. Whatever happens on that page, on that screen, I'm completely in control of the destiny of the piece that I'm working on. I can't, so much has happened to me personally that I have no control over, but that is the one thing that I do have control over. And it becomes quite an empowering thing, to be able to have that. And I think a lot of artists have difficulties of gone through things, and they use art as their way of expressing that and getting it out of their system, or just escapism. And that becomes a huge part of the creative process. Definitely is taking that and channeling it in a positive way.
Yeah, no, I think you're definitely right. I think that's why a lot of creativity and I guess mental health kind of go hand in hand. It's like that restriction and that struggle. It's just a powerful kind of, whether you feel like you need to do it or you need to get something out.
There's definitely release to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, writing is often being one used to sort of, if you're angry with someone, they often say, well, write it down. Rather than ring up the phone or messaging them, is actually write it down as a way of like, what would you say to them, but put it down on a piece of paper. And sometimes it becomes quite cathartic and you're not hurting anybody. And, sometimes in that process, you start to get a bit of understanding of not just your feeling at that moment, but also actually how they might, But yeah, expressing yourself like that is that's such a big part of it, definitely.
Yeah. It's like putting yourself out there, isn't it? I think that's a big part of
taking yourself away from a lot of, social media can become quite damaging if you just feed yourself with nonsense all day long.
Yeah.
There's some good stuff. Don't get me wrong, there's some good stuff out there, but there's also a lot of trash. And it's just not, not healthy. Is why a lot of people decide they're going to remove themselves from social media because they realise they got to a point where it is quite toxic and not good for their mental health. So yeah, there's definitely massive interconnects between mental health and creativity, not just through expressing yourself, but even if it's not something you're doing yourself, to go to I'm not saying go to a gallery like I'm some sort of therapist, because in some cases people can't even get out of our house, let alone go to a gallery, but that thing of focusing on something that's otherworldly or different, or
step up,
taking
familiar.
yourself out of the norm.
Basically. So I have another question. Do you have a favourite place in Southampton, like whether that's somewhere that kind of feeds your motivation to get creative, or somewhere that just inspires you?
There's several pubs.
Doesn't have to be somewhere that's typically.
I mean, funny enough, actually, where I work in the chapel in the old cemetery, it's for some people it's an odd spot because it is literally in the middle of a graveyard.
Surprisingly vibrant area, actually,
but
isn't
it? I quite enjoy, even in the winter months, of just getting outside and going for a little walk around and even reading some of the stories in the gravestones, and just imagining what their lives were like. It's just it's quite a peaceful sort of spot. It's quite, you can find yourself contemplating a lot of things. It's not hugely creative, but in terms of mind, going back to the mental health thing, it's a good spot to be. I mean, I love cinema as well, so Harbour Lights for me is quite a good one. Usually a good selection of movies, anything and everything. There's certainly more, I think, behind the scenes that we don't necessarily get to see, or stuff that gets shouted out about enough. I still like going to live gigs and things like that. Going to one tomorrow night at a mate's band in a pub. But just even doing things like that is, I'm talking about something that's happening tomorrow, but I know just from the people that I know who I'm going to be talking to and listening to different. I've not seen the band before, but the music will be good. I'm pretty sure it'll be different. So it's just another adds to your little experience pot.
Yeah. No, it's good to hear from other people, because I think as well, if you might not necessarily have, depending on what your kind of circle is, or whether you're new to Southampton even, if you've come here for university, it's nice to hear from different people. So where can people find out more about you and your work?
So commercially, day job, as it were, I work for Fruitful Studio at the Design Chapel in Southampton. But outside hours, I do bits and bobs. I do quite a lot of horror film promotional artwork. which you can find on Instagram, David Birch Creative. And I've also started to look into AI imagery, and that's at David Birch Digital, both on Instagram. So if anybody did want to check them out. But if you want to look at my commercial, I say the Fruitful Studios where I'm at.
People can send you questions if they have any.
Absolutely, yeah. Slip into the DMs, as they say. but yeah, there's I'm on LinkedIn commercially.
Cool. Well, thanks so much. You've been a fountain of knowledge.
You're very welcome, and I'm very pleased to be your first guest on your new venture.
Yeah, this is my new
Proud that you're
brunch. Taking myself
just doing it, which is
just pressed record.
And hopefully it has recorded. So we look at the screen now where we're like, "Hey, you're still recording and sound good." I'm glad about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is. But as you're doing, it's making those starts and just doing it. No one's going to get it right first time. No one's expecting you to get it right first time. But the fact you're actually getting out there and doing it is it's brilliant.
Yeah, thanks. I'm feeling pretty proud of myself actually.
Despite your camera cop out.
Yeah, really scared.
Cut that down.
I am very excited because we're going to have our first guest for the podcast, and I am sitting right opposite David Birch.
Why are you laughing? This isn't going well. I'm not a comedian. It's supposed to be very serious.
Dave is a senior creative designer at a design and marketing agency in Southampton. And we actually used to work together.
We did. Just thought that we'd get the ball rolling with this podcast malarkey, and I'm her first guest.
Podcast malarkey.
We can cut that bit out.
This is my creative outlet. It's a new venture for me.
Okay.
But we're not here to talk about me, we're here to talk about you.
Okay.
So I was going to ask you about your role. What is it that you do?
So yeah, my general role, having been in the industry for nearly 30 years, has become a bit of a jack of all trades. So we do a lot of branding, web design, advertising, social media marketing. Obviously, it's a big thing at the moment. But at the moment is predominantly digital marketing, a lot of web development. But in terms of my skill set, I think pretty much whatever a client has a need for.
I think that's the interesting thing with you is I think a lot of people are kind of looking to money from their creativity in whichever form that is.
Yeah.
You also have a lot of university students who are like, have some sort of idea that like they want to be a graphic designer or they want to do something specifically. And I think a lot of people feel like they need to earn money from their creativity. Your sole income comes from your creativity as well. So do you think people can have misconceptions about what that's like? Do you think it has its perks?
I think, for me personally, this might be the case for a lot of designers, almost certainly, I think, probably my generation, is that I came to it as loving art and drawing and being more kind of artisan as a skill set, and then getting to a point of thinking, well, how do I apply this to a career? But I've always had a passion for making things and for being creative. Even in my own free time outside of work, I do various projects. Like a good friend of mine, he's a film director, and he's often looking for bits of marketing, like poster design art or marketing materials that you can take out to Cannes to get funding. And that's something I do because I love doing it. A lot of that he doesn't actually pay for, but I love working on it. Like writing, I do a bit of creative writing myself. So I'm always giving myself projects, and I think to get the best out of anybody in this industry, you kind of need to live it and breathe it. It sounds like an old cliche, but I think definitely, certainly in my experience of dealing with of students who come in as sort of junior designers and sort of getting their foot in the door in terms of getting into the industry. It seems that, not through no fault of their own, I think a lot of the courses are geared very much to a commercial route of design, that's only natural. But sometimes I think the creative side of it almost gets lost, and the process of finding your way through an idea from a brief and to how it comes to fruition sometimes gets is a little bit lost. And so, these guys are often technically brilliant, but sometimes, the creativity isn't quite there, perhaps in some cases. So it's a tricky one, because like I say, I think you've got to, some things you can teach, there's some things you can't. And that's always going to be the case in an artisan creative world. So technically, we've got people that can do, web development, can do great animations, do brilliant video, but then they might struggle with other things. But I think you're right. I think there is a little bit of disillusion when they first come into the industry about what some of the challenges are. And even having that thing of understanding a client's needs, some of that is stuff that I associate it with things like going into a party where you don't know anybody, and you can't go in there like all bombastic, and you can. You could be a massive party and go, hi everyone. Everyone goes, well, they're just a bit much. You kind of have to do that thing of gauging. It's reading a room, and that is something else I think that is so much part of our industry, and understanding a brief, and more importantly, understanding the client and the client's customers. It could be the best design in the world, but if it's not talking to the right people and saying the right thing, it's not going to hit the mark. It could look amazing. So there are so many facets. I think it's, some new to the industry. It's a minefield. There's a lot of stuff at the moment, of so much technical stuff out there. It becomes quite scary when you look at AI and what some of the apps that are out there. We even get asked to do things in Canva, which makes me wince and want to cry. But it's the nature of the beast, and that's the world that we're in. If you're a small business now, it's not too difficult to get yourself a website and a logo and everything you need up and running quite quickly and super cheaply. But is it going to say and do the right things that you want it to, and who your customers are? And it could be, I say, the best piece of design in the world, but if it's not talking to the right people, then you're not going to sell products or services.
Yeah, I think you're right as well in that being creative or practicing creativity is almost like an act, isn't it? It's like a muscle that you need to exercise.
Yeah, I mean, you look, there's the 10,000 hours rule with athletes, to become a professional or anything. I think they work out about 10,000 hours. There's a book about it. Or anybody with a particular skill set of just repetition, doing it time again, to a point that it does become, like they said, like muscle memory. I'm long in the tooth of this game. I've been doing it for far too long. But so there's some things I can do intuitively that I can do without even thinking. And sometimes people will say, "Oh, how would you do that?" And I'm like, I can't actually remember or even know how to tell you. Just kind of do it. But I would say to anybody new to the industry is just absorb as much stuff as possible. See things. There's only so many YouTube tutorials you can give yourself. But I think going to galleries, going to exhibitions, seeing what other designers are out there, currently and historically. Look at. You don't even necessarily read books, but look at books, look at art, and just for me, it's just I just observe everything and anything, because you never know where that idea is. It could be in the smallest of things, or even things people say sometimes can trigger an idea. So yeah, I think for any young designers, my one piece of advice would be exactly that: is go outside, see stuff and do stuff.
Yeah.
Knowing all the software and all the technical stuff is brilliant, and obviously you need to know that. But, feeding the mind, without sounding like an old cliche, is definitely a large part of it.
Yeah. So I think I kind of want to go back and talk about how you grew up as well, because I think your environment when you're young can have a big impact on
Sure.
whether you're creative. Not even whether you're creative, it's almost how you process creativity and whether you feel confident in that. Because I know for me, I had like quite a diverse experience, I guess. Like my mum and dad are both very different. But I think I got quite a well-rounded view on things and experienced things on different sides that I wouldn't have had.
Sure.
I was always in the same environment.
My mum and dad were quite different sort of people, both creative in their own different ways. I mean, my dad enjoyed cartography, did a bit of map drawing and stuff like that back in his day. And my mum has always been kind of quite practical, making things, whether it be baking, painting, drawing, decorating. But for me, I mean, that's sort of the thing with my mum. That's really kind of how I came into drawing, I suppose, if you look at it from a child's point of view. I spent quite a lot of time in hospital as a child having chemotherapy, and that meant I couldn't, because I spent a lot of time in the actual hospital on an intravenous. This was back in the day when you literally had to spend a week in hospital with a thing stuck in your arm. I couldn't obviously do an awful lot. Couldn't run around and play with the other kids, and I only had really one other arm free. So I would draw. Mum would bring in sketch pads and sit there and we'd doodle and just draw all sorts of stuff. And usually my mum would draw something like Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse or something, and then I would try and copy what my mum had drawn. And that was sort of how my initial training, as it were. The other thing my mum did as well at the time, which was sort of quite, again, she never thinks that she's that creative, but this was, I still think even now is genius, and then she could put a book together and it would do very well. But she actually, to help me understand what was happening to me with my cancer treatment, is mum actually drew like little characters battling each other, like red and white blood cells having little fights, and the butterfly drip that was in my arm was like she drew it as a fighting butterfly, almost like a bomber flying over a warfield. And this kind of vision in my head as a child of this Avengers style battle of what's going on with my body, with my mum's way of trying to explain to me what was kind of happening. And I think it's one of those things that's often stuck with me. And like I say, my mum thinks she's not creative, but I still think that's a piece of genius. And it kind of really started there, coming out of hospital and just still wanting to draw and make things. The old classic Blue Peter thing of finding cardboard boxes and egg cartons and making rockets. And both me and my sister enjoyed all that stuff. This is pre-internet, pre-preview. You really had the mighty 3 TV channels back in those days. So we just spent our time being creative. And if we weren't physically making things or drawing things, again, we were outside pretending and being creative in other ways, whether it be pretending with superheroes and sword fights and all those kind of things you do when you're a kid. So being creative has always kind of been part of me from then, really. I guess then getting a little bit older and into school and stuff, I quickly realised that I wasn't going to be the most academic of people, partly because I've missed a few years from school through my cancer treatment. I ended up sort of playing a bit of catch up with things, just simple things like mathematics, reading, writing, all those kind of things. But I got to a point, I suppose, where I did that usual thing. You get sit down and say, what's your career going to be? What do you want to be when you leave school? And at that point, I just thought I wanted to get to art college and work it out from there. I didn't have any grand plans. I kind of liked the idea of maybe designing cars or being an architect, but because my other academic subjects weren't that particularly great, I had to sort of slightly change tack in that regard. Probably slightly different now, but back in then it was like, well, your maths are rubbish, so therefore you need to become a vet, or you're never going to make any money doing painting pictures unless you want to be a bum painting streets, but selling paintings on the strip. But it was all those kind of attitudes back then. So I just realised I had to knuckle down on my GCSEs, get myself enough qualifications to get to art college and kind of really sort of work out from there. Going into college, I initially aimed to get a free foundation course, which I think is quite common. But when I did a few workshops with the college throughout summers running up to that, because it's something that I wanted to do. I got involved with some of their own stuff that they were doing with kids at the time, for anybody that was interested in going to art college. And there was one of the tutors there that sort of said, looking at your stuff, I think you could be a really good graphic designer. We're happy to try and interview you for the foundation course, but if that's what you wanted to do, we think graphic design could be a really good route for you. So I sort of came home one day and said to my mum, right, I'm going to do graphic design. She was like, I thought you were going to do foundation. I went, no, changed my mind. So from there, that's kind of really what happened. I mean, I actually went to art college when I was 16. I didn't do A-levels. I just wanted to get out of school. I wasn't particularly keen on school. It was just get out there, start doing it. And even art college, I did 2 years on a national diploma and then did another 2 years doing high national diploma. Several of my friends decided they were going to do some further stuff with BAs and BA courses, and I just was like, I'm just going to get out there. I want to start making money. Start doing this stuff for real. And the course that I did, which is at Plymouth Art College, it was a really good course. And one of the things that they did on that was they really focused on deadlines. We did a lot of stuff for some local businesses, so there was a couple of real projects in there. But there was a real focus on making it work, commercially, as well as, obviously feeding the ideas and, helping with the creative process. And it did things like really encouraged having notebooks and sketchbooks, just having that and using them all the time, almost forcing you to just express yourself inside and outside of college with things like writing down your thoughts. Could be a shopping list, could be poetry, could be doodle, it could be a cock and balls. It didn't really matter. It was just getting through a habit of whatever was in your head, getting it down so that there was always something to come back to. Neil Gaiman, a famous fantasy writer, which some of you may have heard of and certainly seen his stuff, he does this thing about having a creative compost heap. So he will literally have notepads, post-it notes, scribbles, doodles on napkins, and every time he has a thought or a brain fart, he'll scribble it down and he'll stick it on what he calls his creative compost heap. It might not turn into a book, it might not become a poem, might not be a short story, but it's just his way of getting it out and down somewhere that was real and tangible. And it percolates, it sits there, and you might think, hang on a minute, I had that really good idea a little while ago, and you go back to it and it's there. And again, it goes back to what I was saying originally. It's that thing of just getting into little habits of feeding your mind, and just looking at a screen will get you so far. But, doing things for real and things you can touch and see is, I still think is really valuable and something that I don't think the design world has enough of, certainly at an education level.
Yeah, I definitely had the same sort of, I think a lot of people that would class themselves as creative kind of had this almost starting with some sort of restriction and some sort of struggle, and it's almost like the creativity manifests itself through you, if that makes sense. You're like trying to find your way.
This is the thing I find fascinating. I personally find fascinating with creative thinking, is that it often gets misconstrued as being something that's artisan. So people associate, if you mention being creative to someone, they immediately, if I say to a stranger and they say, oh, what do you do? And you go, I'm a graphic designer. They're like, oh, I can't draw.
Yeah.
That's their initial reaction, is to think, well, I can't, because I don't have an artisan skill, I'm therefore not creative. And it's a bit like what I just said about, my mum doing the drawings when I was in hospital. So it's that similar kind of thing. To me, that shows huge amounts of creativity. Yes, the drawings weren't brilliant. She was the first to hold hand, but it didn't matter. It mattered to me, and that was the point. I was her audience. I was her target market at that particular point, if you're looking at it from a business point of view. And it worked. So I think people need to get, I think literally everybody, anybody can be creative, and people will always find ways to get around certain things. So artisan and creativity are two completely different things.
Yeah.
And being able, there are some amazing painters who are doing incredible paintings, but they're maybe not most, they might struggle with problem solving. There's a guy called Edward de Bono who's got a great book called Serious Creativity, and a large section of that book explains how the kind of brain works and is formed. The first few chapters, there's a great analogy that he uses, which is that the brain is like a flat bed of sand. And, as a baby, for example, your first movement, whether it be crawling or moving a hand, will be like rolling a marble along that bed of sand. And then the more, through repetition, the more that child moves and starts doing things, it's like pushing the marble further and further down this bed of sand to the point that lanes and channels start to form and smooth out and becomes this kind of, it's like neural networks basically. But your first problem solving thing might be a child might realise that if it stands up on a chair, it can make itself taller, and it might see that the mum has put some biscuits on a shelf. So it also knows that it can move a chair to get somewhere. So it thinks, well, hang on a minute, if I move that chair over to that worktop and stand up on this chair, I can reach up and get the biscuits. Now that is a first example of a creative problem-solving thought that you might have. And so it's going from A to C, basically, is creating that, getting from one point to the next. And, so doesn't creativity and problem solving comes in many shapes and forms, and it's not necessarily drawing a logo or a pretty picture. It's finding a way of. A lot of people in marketing are super creative, but they'd be the first to hold their hand up and say they couldn't draw necessarily, but they can still come up with the idea.
Yeah, I really like that you brought that up, actually, because that's something that I really kind of want to get across, I guess, with like the podcast and the whole thing with Inner Avenue is like, well, the whole point of it being called Inner Avenue is you're kind of making your own way and building up your own ideas about what creativity is. And I think you're completely right in that people get confused about what's artistic. So to me, artistic is, yes, you can draw, you can paint, you can do those sorts of things. But being creative and using creativity happens across all different things. Like you say, like maths, you can be creative through maths. You can
absolutely, yeah. It's literally a problem-solving thing. It's answering a brief. Could be chairs. Classic example, using ergonomics and things like that to think, well, okay, if a person sits in that way and needs to put the back. You see it all the time. These they look beautiful chairs, but they haven't answered the brief because you sit in them and they're really uncomfortable. They're super uncomfortable. That to me is a fail. It might look nice, but it's not answered the brief, and I don't find them particularly creative if it doesn't do that. The job I do, I enjoy because for me, it's joining that dot between, business or a service and their customers. A lot of clients who come, that I say a lot, there's a few clients I work with where they allow their own ideas to, they're like, I want this logo and I want these colours and I want to do this in that way. And sometimes you have to say to them, well, actually, if you look at who your audience is and who your market is that actually the right way of doing it? And that's one of the things that, building up relationships with clients is a great way of getting to that point where you can actually turn around and say, well, you've asked us to do a brochure, but actually, have you thought about maybe turning it into a landing page or a microsite or an interactive PDF? And again, it's that thing of taking away the stigma of what everybody's kind of used to and maybe getting them to think a little bit differently, looking at it from a different angle, different way of doing things. So I like bridging that gap. I mean, you only have to look at cave paintings, for example. That wasn't about them saying, look how great my picture of a bison is, and making a beautiful picture, because if you looked at them, you wouldn't necessarily know that it was a bison. The reason why they actually painted it was to go, we were out today and look what happened.
Yeah.
Jeff went over there and picked up his spear, and there was a whole load of 5 of them, and he had hit that one, and then we dragged it home, and then we cut it up and net it. And they were telling stories. They were using pictures as a way of communicating to everybody else that was in part of their clan or their group about what their day was. They weren't there as paintings. They were telling stories. They were communications pieces. And most art of most forms does a similar thing. Any art form all it's doing is it's telling a story. And any good piece of design should do a similar thing. It's a piece of communication.
Yeah. I think it took me quite a long time to come to the same conclusion, actually, because I think you need to try different things and, like you say, like come up with your own ideas and experience the world. It's almost, I think you would struggle, and this is why I don't understand why we go to university when we're so young, because you're going into a new city, navigating a new place on your own. You don't have that support system that you used to have potentially.
Yeah, I mean, so much of it is what we kind of feel like we're supposed to do and almost told to do.
Yeah.
It's the whole kind of like 2.4 children thing. It's like, go to university, get a job, find somebody, get married, have children, buy a house, so much of you kind of feel like you need to keep ticking these things off a massive list, and it's just not the case. you need to, just experience stuff. Everyone, this gap year is a classic example of people that just think, actually, before I'm going into the big wide world, I'm going to do a bit of self-discovery, whatever it might be. And a lot of people mock it, but I still think there's a value to that. And just, but even if you don't have the ability to travel in that way, there's things up your road or down your road, local galleries and cafes. You'll be surprised what is literally round the corner. I'm always finding stuff in Southampton. I've been here for years, and I'm still finding new things to do, new exhibitions and things to see. And some might be not necessarily your thing straight away, but I think you still need to kind of experience them, even if you create an opinion off the back of it. That it's a design you go, well, actually, I know that that's not for me, but that can only be a good thing, in the same way as seeing something and go, wow, I think that's great, and that might be the route that I want to take. It's just, as much literal stuff as possible. I can't express enough how valuable it is. From going back to the design side of things and when I first started, it was kind of on the cusp of computers. So Macs were pretty much just out, and people were starting to use them a little bit in design. But I learned typography through letterpress. I'm not that old, by the way. I'm not super ancient. I'm not about to retire yet. But I learnt so much about typography from that, because once it was set, once you actually, you lay out all your type, it was done. You had to get it right. And the client, you had to get the client to sign things off. They couldn't come back and go, actually, can you change that word? It's like, well, I can, but it's now going to take me an entire day to reset that entire sentence. So, so much of those processes, though, gave me such a good understanding of design basics. Ergonomics is we talked about chair earlier, is a good example of that. Things that there's a balance to things looking right. If somebody's nose was on their cheek rather than in the middle of their face, you'd know that something wasn't. You'd know it was. There's certain balance to even like the length of your tip of your index finger is the same length as from your bridge of your nose to the tip of your nose. And you can try that at home if you ever won't do that. Everything has a weird. It's a weird thing that, again, something just looks right and doesn't. With design, it's just shapes on a page. It could be type or it could be pictures. I don't know, shapes on a page, but using that page and getting stuff to balance is, again, you just, people that lay out furniture in their rooms will know exactly what I mean, in terms of a chair being in a certain spot might not look right to them. And that's, again, it's just as good a form of expressing creativity as being able to draw a bird really well. It's having an understanding of when things look and feel right. But sometimes you have to just do it. You can't teach it.
Yeah. I think that's...
You couldn't say to someone, the place where you put your chair is exactly in that spot. I mean, some designers do, and it irritates me. Interior design is one of those things that does... Quite a lot of interior designers irritate me because, again, they do that thing of like, well, this is what you should do. It's like, no, you don't. You do what you think is right for you. But yeah, you have to... I'm not going to keep repeating myself.
No, you're not at all. It's interesting to listen to. Yeah.
But yeah, just practical stuff. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing as well, isn't it? Like, obviously you grew up without the internet, and when I grew up, it was kind of plug in the internet, unplug the phone.
Yeah, did all of that.
But I think it's interesting now because you've got all these people that are, thinking about going to university and choosing their courses and things like that. And there's so much out there on the internet which might kind of shape your idea of what creativity is. And I think part of that is down to other people's opinions, but also the other side of it is almost like this, and this is getting kind of techie in a way, but, like, what's going to come up on Google and what does the algorithm think about this and that.
Oh, there's so much stuff you get fed. Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I would hate to be a young designer trying to make my way now, because there is just so much. You're just bombarded. You learn one bit of software and 6 months later it's defunct and you have to learn something else. Yeah. It's absolutely, it's insane. My approach has always been, well, come up with the idea first and what it is you want to do, and then you find a way of doing it. So rather than spending, days and weeks training yourself on a piece of software that you then realize is not actually going to be applicable to what it is you really want to do. I tend to, just recently, as an example, I've been looking at AI, image creation. It's whether we like it or not, it's the way the world is going. And so, it'd be very easy for me as a designer to go, well, that's just the future. And I'm an old school designer, so I'm not going to get involved in that. And robots taking over and all the rest of it. So, well, hang on a minute. Why not use it and embrace it? And, even if it might not be the end solution, it might not be the end idea, but it might spark something. It might give you, hang on a minute, I hadn't thought about it this way. Yeah, a computer's just given me an idea that I didn't have before. So it doesn't have to be, even things like that, it doesn't always have to be the end result. It just can also become part of the process.
It's allowing things to be a tool rather than rolling the design of.
And I think the biggest thing with any of those things is just to just do it. Again, with a lot of the tutorials and things you see online, they give you an example and you follow the example. So you spend all that time learning it, but actually the end thing that you've just created is not what you wanted. You just did it because it was part of the tutorial. Whereas my thinking would be, well, actually, if you think of something that you actually what the end result you want, you're going to be more engaged and probably want to learn more because you want that result. It's, some of these online tutorials I think are, technically they're great,